This video contains spoilers for the entirety of Silent Hill F, as well as touching on some sensitive subject matters. Please bear that in mind whilst watching. This series has meant so much to me over the years, as I'm sure it does many others, and some of what's featured in this video essay includes my own interpretation over the events displayed in this game. I hope you enjoy. Silent Hill F is an incredible experience. The atmosphere is horrifying yet beautiful with how it goes about presenting itself this time around, and before anyone says anything, yes, the fog has never looked this good before. They nailed the first thing everyone thinks about when bringing up this series. Combat on the right difficulty still feels just as frantic and threatening as ever before, with you having just enough control to somehow navigate around the game's monsters. There are still moments like in previous titles where you have to run away to save on resources, which is what any great survival horror game should do. Silent Hill F also manages to bring the series back to its much needed roots whilst also paying homages to each of the previous games with how they all incorporated different blends of horror. For instance, you have the more supernatural and otherworldly concepts which were used in Silent Hill 1 and 3. Then there's the game's combat durability system and inventory mechanic, which has been heavily refined from Silent Hill 4. But most importantly, Silent Hill F makes sure to bring back what I would say is the most important and best aspect of this series, which was introduced in the second game, that being how the story is character driven, with it being focused on its main lead and the inner workings of their mind on both a personal and psychological level. Any review out there will tell you that Silent Hill F is a series return that we've all been waiting decades for. But I thought, instead of following what other, far more well-established outlets are making, I'd instead like to talk about what struck me the hardest on a personal level whilst playing through Silent Hill F. That being this title's main protagonist, Hinako, and the way that the game depicts and presents her identity as a character throughout its narrative. Silent Hill F is a story all about Hinako shedding away and destroying her past self as she struggles to conform to the expectations made by those around her. The game's story itself takes place in 1960s rural Japan. Hinako herself is a young teenager who is very much a victim of the circumstances that surround her. Hinako's parents were abusive. Her father, Kanta, was once a positive spry fisherman who had dreams of becoming a chef and opening up his own restaurant, but lost it all when his closest friend stole the money he had made from building that dream away from him, which resulted in her father building up a lot of debt. As a patriarchal dad, he's a bitter, cold and nasty individual that takes out his lost dream by abusing those around him. Her mother, Kime, is an enabler to his actions. Despite having what she thinks is Hinako's best interest at heart, she never speaks up for herself or defends her daughter in front of Kanta. Kime herself is a proud wife and embodies gender conformity, constantly pushing her ideals onto Hinako with how she wants her to become an arranged and submissive wife. Hinako herself despises the idea of being a wife and conforming to her parents and society's demands. She used to hang out with the boys growing up, which made it harder for her to make friends with the other girls. She also enjoys more masculine hobbies like running track and field or playing Space Rangers with her classmate Shu. Before diving into how Silent Hill F depicts self-identity, it's important to understand just how much 1960s Japan conformed to the idea of gender roles and tradition. Being more of a tomboy like Hinako was considered alien at the time. Women and girls were pressured by their families and society to act feminine, loyal, and conform to their gender roles. The 1960s in particular was the last decade in Japan where arranged marriages were the dominant form of matrimony in the country, and all of this is integral knowledge to understand before jumping into Silent Hill F, which is why I'm bringing it up here. It's culturally accurate, okay Twitter? Please stop complaining about every single game that releases and just shut up for once. Anyway, sorry about that tangent there, let's move back on topic. Because of all of these standards and societal pressure enforced on women and girls, Hinako is under a lot of stress and self-doubt because of how she acts and what she enjoys. The things that give her a sense of self-worth and identity are immediately made clear that they aren't accepted by those around her. Even the person Hinako was closest to, that being her older sister Junko, which is someone we never actually see the face of under their mask, leaves her younger sister and their family to become an arranged bride, with her family being given what was known as bride tax to pay off their debt, which was a real thing families did back in the day as a way of gaining the support of the wife's family to convince them to conform to arranged marriages. This narrative theme of tradition versus freedom is constantly at ends with Hinako throughout Silent Hill F's story, and her family is directly trying to shape her identity, making her become the quote-unquote ideal woman in society's eyes. This inescapable reality that Hinako herself will have to face of conforming to societal pressure and becoming a bride is a reality that, regardless of how she feels, is something she will have to face eventually. Despite the difference in time periods, culture and gender, I still find myself relating to Hinako as a character and how she's torn between herself and the world around her. Being yourself and only seeking approval on your own merit can feel incredibly daunting. Despite not wanting to conform to society, everyone needs validation in some shape or form. Not to mention, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to how we've all had someone we was close to in our lives change after joining a romantic relationship. With them no longer having time for you, it's a fear I feel a lot, especially towards friends and family, with them no longer being able to connect with me like they once did before. The relationship between Hinako and Junko is a good example of how others can shape our identities and dictate who we are, especially when conforming to what they want from us. Junko has become the embodiment of what Hinako is most afraid of, a faceless bride who has no identity and only acts in the interests of others and not herself. Hinako's identity is constantly at ends with this predicament, this terrifying idea of changing who she is and losing herself from the harsh demands that others expect of her. Similar to Silent Hill 2 and 3, the enemies that you confront are the manifestations of the fears and anxieties that Hinako sees when looking at the world around her. These monsters give us a better idea of Hinako's character and identity with their designs and how they act. For instance, the glowing monster enemies are manifestations of the gross realities that Hinako is afraid of with how she can't trust men outside of the boys she played with as a child. The older men around her, such as her father or strangers, are now the source of anxiety with their brutish and overwhelming power that they have over Hinako. They animate with this strong and brutish demeanor, showcasing no remorse or restraint. Their tongue animation is just barbaric, and well, you don't really need me to spell out what she's afraid of here. The lack of any strong male role model in her life has given Hinako this idea that all the men around her are only out to take advantage of her. Another prominent, more common monster will be the Kashimashi or blade-legged enemy. They are much more vulnerable and weak to attacks, however they don't go down without a fight. But contrast that with the male enemies, and it's made clear that Hinako is well aware of how men had more advantages and control over women back in 1960s Japan. These doll-like enemies are the manifestations of the other women that Hinako sees around her, and how with the blade-legged monster specifically, they have been bounded, potentially relating to how she sees marriage as a means of trapping women, with how her mother and older sister were both arranged to be married regardless of what they wanted. But by far the most vulgar and strongest generic enemy type in the game has to be the spawning monster. What more is there to say here? It's a gross, disgusting and horrific way to depict how women change during pregnancy. It's never specifically outlined in the game's story or text lore, but I feel like this is Hinako's biggest fear, this idea of losing herself and her identity in the physical sense relating to how your body changes during pregnancy. The realization that whoever Hinako marries will result with her having to potentially carry their child and lose all control over her body, so once again in the literal sense, what makes her own identity with her physical appearance is being morphed and changed at the hands of someone else. I'll admit, this is a really out there reading to go about with this monster's design, but it's my own personal interpretation over what I think is going through Hinako's mind when she conjured up this terrifying manifestation from her psyche with how she goes about interpreting herself and other women. So what is Hinako's self? It's never directly told to the player, but there are multiple moments throughout playing the game where we can interpretate what Hinako actually wants. The most obvious thing she wants is made clear to the player multiple times for her to be supported by those around her. But a one-off interaction that I found interesting when studying Hinako and what she wants for herself is found with an art project she handed into school simply called My Future Self. All that's here is a blank canvas with her name at the bottom. It might sound a bit out there, but I feel like this is all Hinako actually wants. A fresh, clear canvas, one where she can imagine anything that isn't being drawn by society or those around her. Her self-identity yearns to be free from how others are forcing her to think and act. All Hinako really wants is a non-conforming canvas where she can decide what to draw, and what she wants nothing more for it is for it to be blank, which is pretty relatable to be honest. Moving on, I've not yet mentioned this Fox Mask character who is also known as Koto Yuka, but he's also an integral person to Hinako. It's revealed later on in the game's ending, but this is the candidate that she's contemplating marrying throughout the events of the game. Hinako saved him at a young age after he got bitten by a fox, and since that day they've been exchanging messages between each other through post. We see an older version of Koto Yuka guide Hinako throughout the Nightmare World sections of Silent Hill F. He constantly tells Hinako what to do, but with a more caring demeanour. He does care about her, but acts in a way that suits what he would deem as her best interests. Hinako in her journal clearly shows feelings for this person, but it's more of an outlet. Koto Yuki can free Hinako from her family and past trauma so long as she follows what he says. Hinako is very much losing her self-identity with this by weighing out the worst of both of her circumstances. Be stuck with her abusive family or marry Koto Yuki. Sure, he acts nicer, but this is very much her just picking the lesser of two evils. Later on in the game, what all this results into is Hinako going through these extremely graphical and brutal rituals. We see in the literal sense Hinako lose herself and her sense of identity here. She becomes a literal monster, wearing her hate and malice for the ones that have put her through so much turmoil and abuse on her body with this transformation ritual. In the Nightmare World, she now attacks ferociously, making quick use of enemies as she pulverizes them with her new fox arm. This is Hinako's malice. Despite how understandable it is, she has become bitter and numb to the world as a result of how it's treated her. Her personal identity has been lost and taken away by her own hatred for those around her, and all that remains now is hate, malice and violence, the same things that others used against her and what started off this spiral to begin with. Soon after this transformation, we learn that what further resulted from this is Hinako becoming the fog monster. She has been the one chasing down her past younger self and literally killing her off alongside all the people and memories that she's ever had. The Hinako that we're playing as isn't from the modern day. The modern day Hinako is this sad, expressionless monster that's only out to kill her past self, which is what we, the player and protagonist, have been trying to fight up against and run away from up until this point in the game. In this entry, Silent Hill is less of a place and more of a person. Hinako herself has transformed her hometown of Ebisugoka into the series' namesake. This plot twist is genuinely beautiful and tragic. The reason Hinako looks so much younger and is her teenage self opposed to being an adult like Koto Yuki throughout the game up until this point is quite simple to explain. The only part of her identity that hasn't been cast aside up until this point is her younger self, which is why Koto Yuki is an adult in the Nightmare World and not Hinako. This also brings us to the whole faceless imagery, which is seen a lot throughout Silent Hill F. It was the first footage that we saw for the game back when it was teased so many years ago, and it left a very strong impression. It was used a lot throughout the game's marketing, but it's only really Hinako that has this transformation happen to her. It's purposefully made ambiguous as to what it actually means, but to me, throughout seeing it happen in multiple playthroughs, my interpretation of it is quite literal. Time has run out for Hinako, and she's been made to make this decision she doesn't want to make or should have to at such a young age. Hinako is made constantly aware of where her life is leading her throughout the game and is beyond in distress about it. Hinako sacrificing her freedom is what results in her becoming the Fog God, which in the game is also called the Shiramuku, and in Japan is what's known as a traditional bridesmaid outfit. Her face is completely missing, with no expression or way of speaking, only to be represented, devoid of any way to talk back. When she's seen arguing with herself before committing to marriage, we actually see this happen, which is the result of her choosing, or more accurately, being forced into this marriage with Koto Yuki. Hinako is forced into a decision that she doesn't want to make, resulting in her face falling off, becoming completely numb and non-emoting in an attempt to protect her own identity by, well, not having one, since to her this is a fate far worse than death itself. Talking from my own experiences, there are moments where you just want to be unplugged from thinking about the issues that plague your mind. To a lot of people, when struggling with trauma and abuse, the idea of forgetting it at any price can be a more desirable outcome than actually confronting it. This causes Hinako to become a literal monster, destroying her past and eventually becoming the Shiramuku, who you fight at the end of the first playthrough. When playing through this fight, I originally thought that it would result in Hinako being able to convince her future self to not go through with the marriage, but unfortunately there is another factor that's been influencing Hinako's decisions here, one that she herself as well as the player had no way of knowing about until it happened. It's interesting, the game up until this point has painted Shu as a very likable character. He's the only person in Hinako's life that's treated her like an equal and hasn't seen her as lesser than for being a girl. He's looked after Hinako throughout her life and has helped her out on many occasions. But there is one small piece of foreshadowing found throughout Silent Hill F that alludes to the more ugly side of Shu's personality. Shu's family are pharmacists. He is very adept at making medicinal recipes. Through texts and journal entries found throughout the game, we learn about this, as well as how the people of Ebisugoka are very traditional in how they didn't trust modern medicine, only stuff locally made. During our time playing Silent Hill F, Hinako has been taking these drugs that from my understanding act as antidepressants. Shu made them for her to help her cope with what she's been going through with all the societal pressure from school life, as well as what her family has been saying and doing to her. Anyway, the reason I hate this guy is that he actually spikes them with this medicinal property that forces Hinako to reflect on her decisions. All of this is revealed in the game's bad ending, which we'll be taking a look at a little later on in this video. But yeah, to further push this theme of Hinako's identity and decisions being made for her, this whole time Shu's been having her regret the decisions that she's been making with these drugs, which really adds a whole other layer to how we see Hinako act throughout our time seeing her in the game. Shu's reasoning behind all of this is how he doesn't think it's right for her to go through with the marriage idea, which up until that point Hinako saw as her only means of escaping all the problems that surround her. But it's more implied throughout the story that he laced the antidepressants because of his envy of Hinako not dating him. It's done out of spite and jealousy. It's really sad too, since Shu and Hinako were close friends before growing up. They once saw each other as just friends and equals. Hinako even states in her journal that she wants Shu to be just her friend. I really like how Silent Hill F tries to pave a platonic friendship between these two. Not all friendships between a guy and a girl should have to become a romantic relationship. It feels kind of forced in a lot of media and I'm kind of sick of seeing it. As a guy, I've made a few female friends over the years, and let me just say, society's push to force the two into a relationship is so annoying. Why can't a guy and girl just be friends? This is why I honestly hate Shu. He represents that side of society that honestly pisses me off. You can't just have a friend of the opposite sex, you have to be in a relationship. Even if the two of you somehow get along, you'll always have others thinking or trying to push the two of you to become an item. It's so annoying. Like dude, just play Space Wars and be yourself, don't force a relationship just because you're older now. Sorry, I've gone on a bit of a tangent, but man, I really liked how Silent Hill F painted Hinako and Shu as close friends, so this plot twist really got to me. So anyway, moving back on track, long story short, this unaware over-reliance on drugs causes Hinako in the first game's ending on her wedding day to have a mental breakdown, killing herself, Shu, and her parents, which is later confirmed during the post-game's credit scene. And that is the vanilla ending to Silent Hill F. I can't say I expected it to be this tragic. Drugs are not a valid replacement for real human connections, which is something Hinako desperately needed. She never gets to actually talk about her problems with anyone but herself. The people that she kills, I think, is the game pointing out the ones that should have connected with Hinako and gave her an outlet to talk things out and repair her sense of self-identity. Despite being a good friend up until that point, Shu should have talked things out with Hinako instead of making her those drugs that she asked for. This shows clear intent of him trying to morph and shift Hinako's identity into the kind of person that he wants, since he knows he can't really get with her. The credits roll and we see the tragic reality of Hinako losing her sense of identity and, well, existence as a whole to those who brought this abuse into her life in the first place. But as you all know, there are multiple endings to be unlocked, as is true for any Silent Hill title, with each subsequent playthrough bringing with it more revelations and layers of the game's story to the player as they piece together the bigger picture. I feel like to better understand Hinako and in turn how Silent Hill F goes about displaying her identity, that it's important to go over these endings to better understand the bigger picture of just who Hinako is. By fulfilling certain pieces of criteria, we can achieve 3 different ending outcomes. The most important thing we must not do under any circumstances is consume any of the pills found throughout the game. This is since, as previously established, it will result in the downfall of Hinako's mental health and will have her lose herself to the influence of whatever she has laced them with. So anyway, after not doing that and finding this sword item, we can now confront the ending marriage scene again with 3 different outcomes.
It's a sun shower.
What fans have dubbed the bad ending or the Fox marriage ending has Hinako confronting her older self before the marriage, saying how she took everything away from her. This is more referring to her memories and younger self's identity, since she's the one that brought Silent Hill into Ebisugoka. After engaging in a fight, her younger self loses since, well, she isn't the one making the decisions here. It's her older self that's making the decisions here, or more accurately, it would be Koto Yuki, the fox masked broom. Suddenly, Shu shows up in an attempt to stop the wedding and tries to convince Hinako not to go along with the marriage. In response, she remarks how she wishes in the literal sense that she could split herself in two. One to continue being the girl who played Space Wars with Shu, and the other to go along with marrying Koto Yuki. Once again, this confirms how Hinako is constantly at odds with herself and her actual identity here. Sure, her younger self is the loudest part of her, the one that the audience is most aligned with and is played as in most moments of the game. But now that we see her older self, the one with the fox mask, without the influence of the pills and her younger voice, it's made clear that she's not completely against the idea of marrying Koto Yuki. Shu then runs off and Hinako tries to stop him, and it's here where it's revealed that the pills that she was taking were in fact made to make Hinako reflect on her decisions and want to change her mind on the marriage. Well done, Shu, you went from being one of the best characters in the game to being one of the worst. At least he sounds guilty about it.
I'm such a piece of trash!
Anyway, he becomes part yokai, more specifically a Tsukogame, and we start a boss fight. Usually I wouldn't bring up the boss fights here, but the dialogue exchange between Shu and Hinako is pretty interesting during this sequence.
I knew good and well you hate being treated like some helpless girl, but I realized I've been seeing you in a way you can't stand.
People telling me I had to act a certain way because I'm a girl. But I didn't actually hate that I was born a girl or anything like that.
I got it all wrong. I've been driving you into a corner. It was obvious how you were feeling by the look in your eyes. But I still didn't get why you were struggling.
No! Helped me open my eyes. Because of you, I was finally able to be reborn!
Hinako doesn't hate being a girl, and even though she's endured many hardships, she does acknowledge that they have, in her own words, helped her become reborn. I just thought this was worth bringing up when talking about her identity, as she very much likes being a girl. Her problems more spur from how 1960s Japan treated women. So anyway, you save Shu and he gives Koto Yuki his blessings in this rather, I'm just gonna say it, downright cringeworthy moment.
If you ever make my Hinako unhappy, I'll beat you to a pulp.
Hinako belongs to me. She is no longer yours.
No way! She's my partner, so she's always mine. I'm just lending her to you.
Stop treating me like an object.
Yeah, things are written a bit too black and white here. I think this scene is a bit too on the nose. But anyway, there's an interesting transition here showing Hinako in her bride outfit, the Shiromuku, and well, she's clearly not happy with this ending. This form shows she's thrown away her self-identity and her aspirations to become Koto Yuki's subservient bride, the very thing that she despised her mother and older sister for becoming. The only thing that's different between this ending and the original is that she now has the added approval of Shu, her childhood friend. I mean, that's just great. This also shows that Shu once again sucks at communicating with Hinako and doesn't actually act in her best interest, with how he hasn't changed even before the wedding and not seeing Hinako after all this time since she was spirited away and went missing. In the post-credits scene, we see her younger self regret these decisions, lamenting how she doesn't want to become like her mother and sister in this pretty gross and morbid ending. In many ways, this conclusion is just as bad as the default ending, it's just much more manipulative. Especially with how Hinako herself fights for this reality by denying her own existence in order to follow through with what Shu and Koto Yuki wants. Displaying pretty graphically how if we as people only follow through with what others want and expect of us, we will in turn lose what makes us ourselves. Hinako is without identity here and has become a character in Koto Yuki's story and not her own. The next ending which can be unlocked is called the good ending or fleeing the wedding. Young Hinako confronts Yonko this time as she's the one making sure the wedding goes smoothly. Junko does empathize with Hinako's younger self here, but ultimately tells her that it's too late to change her or her future self's decisions on the wedding, it has to happen. This doll, however, shows up and stops Junko, allowing Hinako to destroy the wedding. She's finally taking some initiative here and doing what she actually wants. I haven't really talked about the doll in this video yet. What this entity actually represents isn't ever made directly clear to the player. I have seen some interpretations on this character online, but information on it is pretty scarce at the moment. To me, I see it more as Hinako's actual will. It's the first thing we actually see when starting up the game, and it constantly attempts to remind Hinako to act as a person and to be herself. It can act somewhat sinister at times however, but it does ultimately help Hinako on her journey of self-realization. I also think that it might be an enemy of the Fox Cult since it acts against them, but this is going beyond the scope of this video. I'm never quite sure of its intentions, just like Hinako herself when it comes to whether or not it's doing all of this out of actual spite or self-sabotage. This isn't the most transparent interpretation of what this doll represents, but I do think it could be as simple as just being an item that represents Hinako's childhood. And with the game's story having themes of identity being to listen to your younger self, it makes sense that the character to ultimately guide Hinako would be something representative of that innocent time of her life. One where she simply acted with no restraint or level of self-censorship, where she was herself in her purest form, that being as a child. Anyway, back to the wedding. So after destroying the shrine, her future self with the fox mask appears and you engage in a fight similar to the default ending again. However, Koto Yuki shows up to stop younger Hinako from winning. But then... Whoa, it's everyone's favourite character, Shu again, and he praises Hinako for actually speaking up for herself. He's probably under the impression during this ending that Hinako has been taking his pill since this was his original plan to stop the wedding. You don't need me to point out how messed up that actually is. You then fight against Koto Yuki as in the Nara as he attempts to still make Hinako into his wife. Once again, the battle dialogue here is pretty interesting.
You fell for me and devoted yourself to pursuing me. I too want to devote myself to living my own life.
A woman's happiness is not to be given a man's love.
My happiness is something I decide. It's not something given to me by anyone else.
Hinako. A baby bird who will remain a baby until fly.
The way that Koto Yuki and many people around Hinako only see her as a child for not wanting to conform to marriage and living her own life is why we see Hinako only appear as a child throughout the game. It's not until like in the previous endings that she accepts being a bride that we see her become the sad Shiramuku form, and only then does the world see her as an adult despite her literal age. It's really easy to miss this dialogue, but I do think it's integral when it comes to understanding why Hinako is depicted as a child throughout all of Silent Hill F. Her identity in the physical sense is being manipulated by society's viewpoint back in the day over a woman not being married in her 20s. This is a more literal interpretation of why she still looks like a child next to Koto Yuki when they're supposed to be the same age. Only through being married can she transition from being a girl into a woman, which was society's viewpoint back in 1960s Japan. Moving on, you defeat Koto Yuki and leave alongside Shu back to Ebisugoka, but oh no, the rest of the town has been evacuated due to a poisonous mist that you're unaware of and they both die. Or at least it's heavily implied. I can understand if this all sounds a bit jarring, but the whole thing comes out of left field despite it being somewhat foreshadowed beforehand. There's some kind of will or supernatural entity that's preventing Hinako's story from playing out how she wants it to, be it through the wedding or natural disasters. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a huge fan of this part of the game's writing, but that wraps up the quote unquote good ending. That brings us on to the final true ending. This one's the most interesting by far and finally paints the picture behind the identity of just who Shimizu Hinako actually is. Before even getting to the wedding scene, Hinako already manages to reconcile with her future self. She also speaks up against her older sister for the first time, saying that regardless of what happens, that she'll be the one to shape her own self, being well aware that both versions of Hinako, regardless of the different outcomes, have suffered and agonized over this whole ordeal long enough. When finally arriving at the wedding and seeing Junko, Hinako talks about both of the game's previous endings and how there's some other force at play here toying with them. Soon after, Fox Mask Hinako shows up and the two start to see eye to eye with one another. However, these other forces take over and begin to control them, making the two fight so that the marriage will continue. I've deliberately tried to avoid bringing up the Fox clan in this video, but it's made more obvious in this ending that they want Hinako to be married, and also that Koto Yuke was also being used by them to force her into a marriage because of female sacrifices or some other forced supernatural reasons. Sorry, they're just not that important to Hinako or her themes of self-identity. They more or less act like last minute 4D chess playing villains, which is why I'm glossing over them. They kinda suck, to be honest. Anyway, back to Hinako and the true ending. What's cool here is that despite this being a refight between two opposing clans, you actually control both Hinakos through this reflection. It represents how Hinako is more aligned with her own identity and is accepting herself, both her anxious and vulnerable side as well as her aggressive and malicious side over the people that hurt her. She then defeats both bosses simultaneously, freeing Hinako and Koto Yuki from the clan's rituals. However, Koto Yuki stays behind, helping you leave, wondering if it was the clan's influence that dictated his feelings for Hinako or if he did actually fall in love with her. They then decide that more time is necessary to reach this conclusion before leaving, which unfortunately still binds Hinako to this idea that she needs to consider marriage even more, despite how she genuinely hates the concept and has fought against it all this time. Which is pretty sad, to be honest, and she's constantly suffered throughout the game trying to be free over the idea of how marriage turns a girl into a woman in society's eyes, and to not let that dictate who she is as a person or for it to be a part of her identity. I did like how Hinako and Koto Yuki's relationship was purposefully kept ambiguous, and I personally don't think their actual feelings for one another were all just some artificial stage play that was devised by the Fox Cult. The letter that you receive from Koto Yuki is also nice. He's embracing his inner child and living out the things he missed out on after losing it to the cult when he got bitten. In the opposite vein of Hinako's story, Koto Yuki is also communicating to its younger self and trying to obtain what was taken away from him as a child. It's just like how Hinako all this time has been fighting to be an adult in her own eyes, away from what society back in 1960s Japan defined as a woman. Hinako is still fragmented here in the literal sense, however, and I will admit it's kinda tough to analyse just what's going on between the two Hinakos in the game's true ending. The younger part of herself is seeking a passion that she's unsure even exists, whilst her older self, now free from the Fox mask but not the arm, wants to propose on her own terms to Koto Yuki. And it's here where she manages to create her own inner sanctum, a silent Ebisugoka where no one lives, and the game kinda just ends here. This isn't entirely a happy ending. Hinako is still fragmented, both figuratively and literally, but I feel like that's the point. Also, having this platonic, non-romantic ending is a good thing in my opinion. Its message of finding yourself before conforming to others and seeking a romantic relationship is something I'm sure is very appropriate to a ton of people out there. Even as someone of the opposite sex, this ending still struck a chord for me personally. Too many stories are written out there with romance being the reward in the end, the thing all humans are trying to achieve, so I can appreciate how Silent Hill F doesn't give this to the player. It makes the story of Hinako's character feel more complex and personal as a result of this. Silent Ebisugoka and the fragmented Hinakos more act as the inner psyche or mental state of the future Hinako that we never actually see properly throughout the game. I also think that us not seeing Hinako's future self here is intentional. The choices that she makes throughout the different playthroughs directly dictates who she becomes, which is this literal monster. This all brings us back to that blank canvas comment we looked at before. Not seeing or knowing her future self is what Hinako actually wants. Knowing that she will become a faceless bride due to all of the pressure she received is the whole reason the conflict arrives in the first place when starting up Silent Hill F. So the absence of an older Hinako is more of a positive thing. Her life is no longer predictable, it's free to be anything she wants, she now has control over it. And all of this is left up to the audience to interpretate, which is pretty on brand for this series. Silent Hill F teaches us what makes up our own identities as people isn't something that only we can influence and control. Many different people and factors out of our power, such as culture, living circumstances and time periods, also decide our own individual identities, which can be for better or worse. So in the end, who exactly is Hinako? The game alongside the character herself constantly distorts who we know as Shimizu Hinako. She can be many different things. At the very core of Silent Hill F is Hinako, the main lead, and what makes or breaks this experience is how invested you feel when it comes to how the game's narrative goes about this. To me, Hinako is many different identities that make up who she is as a person. There's anger and malice at how the world has treated her, but then there's also her scared and anxious side over the idea of where her future could be heading towards. A real living and breathing person is constantly changing and adapting new identities that further make up who they are as an individual. I feel like Hinako is a more relatable character than previous Silent Hill protagonists like James Sunderland or Henry Townsend because of this. Despite having a different gender, I find myself relating to her more since, well, we've all been a teenager. It's a really scary part of your life where you're being forced to transition into a different person. You're no longer unaware of the judgmental views of those around you, and there's this constant feeling of having to conform and appeal to the views of others, such as acting a certain way or no longer hanging out with the opposite sex as friends, with it being seen as the two of you in a romantic relationship because of how others perceive you. Silent Hill F's narrative about Hinako and her struggles to keep her identity in a constant battle from her own self-destructive anxieties and how others view her feels impactful as you're playing and understanding just who she is as you figure the story out piece by piece. This video was created as an outlet to allow me to talk more about the game and how it can impact us as people. I can understand that some players might feel mixed on Silent Hill F as a whole, and I myself have some pretty strong opinions both good and bad about the title. But I didn't want to make some opinion piece with this one and to instead talk about what I found to be the strongest aspect in its narrative, that being Hinako and her struggles with understanding herself. At the end of the day, despite the amount of research, thought and effort that I put into this video, I'm sure there will be more ways to analyse the story of Silent Hill F and Hinako as a character, so I very much encourage you to let me know how you read into this title in the comment section. Thanks so much for watching, feel free to support this channel and I really hope you have a nice rest of your day.